So we'll go ahead and get started on this panel presentation, the final one in this breakout session. It's something a little bit different than any presentation that I've had in tracks I've moderated before, so we'll do our best keeping on time. We have an hour slated for it. What our goal is to have each of 3 presenters, actually 4 that are here, but 3 groups, give about 15-minute presentation and then leave about 15 minutes at the end for questions. And then if people don't want to ask questions in front of the group, would like to just come talk to one of the panelists, we'll open it up for that as well. So I'll start off, I guess, an introduction of myself. My name's Loeser. I'm a water resources engineer at the Iowa Flood Center. I was pretty heavily involved in this project from the Iowa Flood Center side, so I can let we slip when we talk about this stuff. But ultimately, I'm just here as a moderator, and we're going to hear the story of this project. It's probably best if you haven't read the short intro in the program, I'll just read it to you. In 2010, the Department of Natural Resources initiated a project to map the floodplains for all streams across the state of Iowa. Along with producing products in accordance with FEMA Zone A standards, other secondary products and services are available to the citizens of Iowa. This panel will describe the mapping process, some of the challenges, the headaches, some of the stressful nights of working on this project. We'll present the secondary products. So not only did it create some of these floodplain mapping products, but there's many other products that will be of use for citizens of Iowa, and we want to share that and share who to be able to contact and the process to get those information. And then also we're going to wrap up with using the modeling data both conceptually and technically to be able to do hazard assessment now that we have a known depth in a location. So with us we have Traci Tylski. I try to add an I in there, a hydraulic engineer from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers in Omaha. Her background has worked as an intern for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, has worked at a consulting engineering firm, and is now back to a career position, started that in 2014. We have Kahle, the Department of Natural Resources. Really is a senior GIS analyst, but so much more. He's been a project manager for this project. He's been the liaison between contractors and the DNR, contractors, and just a overall glue that tried to keep all of us from going insane. And then Jessica Turba and Terry Brown, Iowa Homeland Security and Emergency Management. So we have the flood risk side and recovery planning side. So we're going to try to take this full circle. This project started in 2010. The information, it often comes out that this project is completed. Well, the mapping portion of the project is almost completed. Our partners DNR and then even Homeland will have years and years of work till this is a full completed project. So with that, I'll turn it over to Traci.
Thanks, Tony.
We have a pointer if you need it.
Okay.
And an advancer.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. Hi, everyone. My name is Traci Tylski. As Tony said, I work for the United States Army Corps of Engineers in the Omaha District, and we partnered with the Iowa DNR in this project. And we really have come a long way since the time that I started on this project as an intern in 2012 until now. I mean, back in 2012, I remember talking about some of the tool sets that we were thinking about creating for this rapid floodplain mapping process. And seeing theory become reality, I mean, that's an engineer's best dream come true. So I'm going to start out with the background on the project and kind of how it got started. So mitigation equals risk informed decisions. You can't make the best possible decisions with the worst data. This map that I'm showing you guys right here is over 40 years old. It was last updated in 1979, and this is the community of Ida Grove. I don't know if you guys can see that closely, but it still has zones A1 through 30 on it. And I actually had to Google what those were because I had never seen them before. So it's that outdated. So there's obviously some communities that need some updating and need some extra TLC. So there's definitely a need for new and updated mapping. And Omaha District, partnering with the IFC and the Iowa DNR, we created basically an automated script that helped us create really rapid floodplain modeling. And so we created scripts that set up HEC-RAS, manages the data. We also created a QA/QC tool to make sure that everything was running accordingly and to making sure that everything was in the right place. So for the Iowa Floodplain Mapping Project through USACE, it was a Section 22 PAS study. And there's a lot of background on the funding and stuff like that. I always tell my boss that I don't care where the funding comes from, I'm just really good at spending the money. And there was 55 HUC 8 watersheds total. The Army Corps of Engineers did 8 of those, and if you guys can do the math, the other 47 the Iowa Flood Center did. So this is kind of a map of the FEMA CNMS tool. And as you can see, a lot of the populated areas, with the exception of Alabama, I think is really funny, is all mapped and studied streamlines. And a lot of the areas in the Midwest have yet to be updated. So that was kind of an issue. So there's obviously still a need for updated mapping and Zone A mapping in general. So I don't know kind of the technical background of everyone in the room, but I'm going to kind of explain the difference between Zone A and Zone AE mapping. Zone A was how we mapped this entire project, and it's an approximate study. And so it basically just gets a floodplain map on a map and gives people an idea of their flood risk so that they can make risk-informed decisions. Zone AE mapping requires a flood insurance study and some extra paperwork, but ultimately it's a more detailed study that also incorporates some bridge data and some structure data. And so this project was very unique, where we have Zone A maps, but they are still the quality of the Zone AE detailed study, with the exception that we didn't create an FIS, and we also don't have structure data. So what I'm getting at is we have the opportunity to update any of these areas into Zone AEs, but we just need the structure data. So we kind of made it so that there was that chance of updating some other communities later on. So the rapid floodplain mapping process, this is it. My boss, Tony Kraus, actually started this project in 2012 with all of us, and he had this scratch paper that had this flow chart on it, and this was the flow chart. So I thankfully went through and automated it. And if you notice, everything in red is data input, everything in purple is manual work, everything in yellow are the scripts and tools, and everything in blue is reporting. So you can tell there's a lot of red for data input, and there's not much purple for manual work. The only process that we actually did manually was the cross-section drawing and the cross-section revision, the actual HEC-RAS modeling, and the manual cleaning. So that's really not a lot considering what it would take to map one of these streams from scratch. Here was the study area. As I said earlier, the IFC crew modeled 47 HUC 8 watersheds. USACE did our tiny little portion of 8. It was still a lot though. And so that equated out to, so we started out with a large data set and then took it down to a stream by stream basis. And so imagine 13,000 individual streams modeled and 14,000 stream miles. So in order to manage all of this data, we created Python scripts that basically would break up the larger data so that we can manage it on a stream-by-stream basis. And so it created all of these different folders, which was everything that you could possibly need to model an individual stream from that big, large HUC 8 watershed that I had showed you earlier. So it takes the left and turns it into the right to make it more manageable. And now I have a video to kind of show how we modeled all the streams. Oh no, just kidding. What did I do? Is it not working? There we go. So this kind of takes you through the process step by step from beginning to end. The total video is 8 minutes, 30 seconds. So as you can see, we could pretty much crank out up to 20 streams a day, I think was my record. And so modeling process became very, very automated. So I'm going to kind of run you through how we did all of this and kind of explain what's going on. So this is what you would open up in ArcMap. It would already be preloaded. You wouldn't have to load any of this in there. This would all be ready to go. You would go up to RAS geometry or GeoRAS and set up the layers, which again, those were pretty much all loaded into the ArcMap for you. And so After going through and clicking all of these, then you basically just run GeoRAS. And so it made it very, very simple to just go through, open up an individual stream, and be able to just click through. You kind of felt mindless after a while with all the clicking, and you kind of memorize the process over and over again, and you don't kind of need the instruction sheet. And so this is just running the GeoRAS, and we created this process, and I was actually the one in 2012 to create the step-by-step process of what buttons to push and where. And we made it so that an intern level person was able to work on this project with all of us. And so here, this is just a cross-section cut line, GeoRAS process. Sorry, this part is the most mundane. And then we're going to get to a really cool tool that the IOC created and USACE modified so that we could use it on our system. And that was the Arc2Ras tool. And this is the Manning's N values that they're going to pull. So it automatically pulls in the Manning's N values. You don't have to put those into RAS. And then basically we made it so that when you opened up HEC-RAS, it had a preloaded geometry file, a preloaded flow file, and a preloaded project. So all you had to do was double click on the project, open it up, and start working on it. And so this is the RAS export, which is very typical. That just exports a geometry file just so that you can import it. And this next tool that we're going to click on is the Arc2Ras. And this one, I don't know if any of you guys have actually done hydraulic modeling before, but it is very tedious trying to figure out which flow points are associated with which cross sections. This tool automatically goes through and creates your flow file for you and associates a flow at every single cross section. So there's no interpolation necessary, nothing like that. It automatically loads it in there for you. The first time I went to go and create my own stream that wasn't associated with the Iowa floodplain mapping project, I was in for a very rude awakening because none of it was automated. It took 20 times longer. So here, as I said, you're just going to go to your individual stream folder, open up the preloaded hydraulics folder, and there's all of your stuff already loaded in there. So the only things that are left for you to do are to import the geometry, set the cross sections for each bank station. That is probably the longest of the process within HEC-RAS, and then to run the model without any errors. And we also have a QA/QC tool that USACE developed because we didn't want to have to go through every single model and hand QA/QC every single one of them. So we created an automated system to go in and check if there were crossing profiles, dips, any missing flow files, or if there was flow data that had gotten fat-fingered. I mean, it happens. People make mistakes and go in and edit a flow file on accident. I was an intern. I did that a lot. That was always my error. And so it tells you which errors you need to fix. And so you're able to go back and fix those. So as I said, the QA/QC, these were the different reviews that it would run. So it would run a completeness review, a geometry review, and a flow review. And it would check and make sure that you had everything in the right place and everything was ran at the right time. So what I mean by having it run at the right time was if you ran QA/QC and then there's a change made in the geometry, it'll pick that up. And it'll know that you didn't run QA/QC on the latest geometry file or flow file. So we have all of these models, and now I'm at the point where we finished everything, we're good to go. I've been on this project since I was an intern. It's really great to see where it goes, and then you kind of sit there and look at each other like, okay, now what? What do we do with all this information? Now we're just gonna hand over all of this data and what happens? And so we have some continued mapping efforts that USACE has ability to work with. And some of the communities are currently mapped in detailed study areas or Zone AEs, and they are not being updated through this study. And so those are what Chris and I had discussed as a stitch and fix process, where FEMA has a rule that if an area is already mapped as a Zone AE, you can't remap it in a Zone A. It has to come back at that standard of a Zone AE detailed study. So those areas were not able to be updated through this study. And so in the case of Ida Grove, you guys had seen that that map is over 40 years old. And so there are some communities that actually need to be remapped and need to be updated, more so for the fact of making risk-informed decisions, having the best available data. And so we created redelineation models, and those kind of helped, but we also have current Zone A models that have the ability to be created into Zone AE models with some additional reporting and ultimately the structure survey data. So there is that opportunity there. So if anyone knows of anyone in a community that wants their maps remapped, we have the data. Any questions? Or we'll do questions next.
Questions?
Yep. Okay.
Red button's pointer, yeah, and left and right for advancing. She'll recognize us.
Good afternoon. Nice to have you all here. I'm here to talk about the Iowa statewide floodplain mapping effort here, and this is actually many different groups came together to do this, most notably Corps of Engineers, Omaha, and Rock Island districts, of course the Iowa Flood Center. Iowa National Heritage Foundation came through with some money and some ideas on what we could use our byproducts for, so I'll touch on that a little bit as well. The first thing I wanted to show was kind of our floodplain mapping stages, the workflow stages, the protocol we're following when we do these, when we are rolling these maps out. Stage one is the initial mapping of the inundations, but that's kind of where it takes off after that. We have draft floodplain hazard products that we go out and introduce to communities, get feedback, make sure that it's a good map, make sure there's no new grading projects, that sort of thing. We don't want people to have a bad map and have to enforce a bad map, and we sure don't want to have to go back and fix the maps or hear about fixing the maps. So we're getting out in front of everybody and trying to get it up front, any changes that we can. It'll really help the process later on. This is suggested by FEMA. They learned their old method used to be they send a bunch of maps to a community, send them on their desk, and you know, you got a problem with it, come back and talk to whoever, and it's a big legal drawn out process. So we're trying to get ahead of that, make sure that people can buy into the maps that we're producing. We get feedback from them, and I'll go into that a little bit, and then incorporate changes as are warranted. You know, some people just say this map's wrong, but they don't have anything to dispute that. We talk to them and we try to show them what our approach was, why we're doing things how we are. There's usually not been a whole lot of resistance to our maps as we go out, because we've had a lot of high water incidents in this state in the last 10 years, so people have it fresh in their memory how far up the water's been. They can look at our maps and they agree with most of what they see. After we incorporate that, then we go and we hire contractors to take these to DFirm, and we've have one contractor here in the audience that's working with our stuff, and she's having all sorts of fun. So where the stages of where these counties are, anything in green here, you'll see is in the process of becoming a firm right now. A lot of them are really close. Some have become firms down in this corner. This part of the state, we're just getting ready to roll out data to the communities. So it's kind of the stage two. We haven't gotten feedback yet. We're anticipating a good showing for these. Then over in the northwest part of the state, of course, is the Corps of Engineers stuff. And we're starting to receive their data and getting that ready to go for these meetings as well. But our protocol all along has been, before we go in and just give this data out to anybody, we want to get public input to make sure that they are aware of the maps and they agree with what they see. We don't want someone to just show up with the maps and they have never seen them before. That would be a bad thing. The DNR floodplain management section, really important section in the DNR as far as I'm concerned, because they're stewards for watching out what is being developed in floodplains and issue permits. They're a very busy group, but a very, very competent group, and I would encourage you, if you have any questions about rules or NFIP, that sort of thing, contact these folks. They're familiar with our products that we're doing, of course, because they're with the DNR, but they haven't seen everything that we have yet because it's just not been available yet. Let's see, there's a little bit in here about the floodplain mapping program as well, but I'll let you wander around in this if you'd like to. So the whole state, it was, you know, when we started this project, we're going to go make floodplain maps and all happy. Well, there's a lot of streams in Iowa, and, you know, we got the black and gold state here, right? 103,000 miles of streams were digitized, and we had a script that ran through some of that, but a lot of it was manual editing. I just wanted to give an idea here of the amount of effort and the people that were involved with this project. It wasn't just a select group. There was quite a few people brought in. So I talked about going out to the communities and getting feedback, and this is something that the Flood Center developed with us. It's a really great tool. We go over this at our community meetings, but you can go in and view all these maps on the IFC's iowafloodmaps.org and go down to the level of, you know, if you see something wrong in this area, you click on it and it brings up this little form with the XY location and gets some contact information from you, and then a little bit of what your concern is or what it is you're seeing you're trying to draw our attention to. That's worked really well. We've had not a whole lot of people dispute what we're bringing out there because, again, we have recent flooding events fresh in people's mind, and they see this stuff, and it's usually pretty much in agreement with what they've seen. So some of the derivatives of this, and this is all available on this through this site as well. I think I have a slide that goes into this a little more later, but the floodplain maps, the regulatory maps are accessed through this, but the derivative products are accessed through the flood risk management maps link. So derivatives, depth grids are just a different look at what the flood is. It's one thing to know that, yes, I'm in or out, but how deep is the water? Is the water 2 inches deep or is it 2 feet deep? You know, pretty drastic emergency response difference there. Do you elevate? Do you evacuate? Do you sandbag? There's just different things that you can do at different depths. So this is a really valuable tool and gives a better idea of what's going on in the flood. So we did the 100-year course, but we also did the 2, the 5, the 10, the 25, the 50, the 100, the 200, and the 500-year flood events. And so we have depth grids for all of those return periods, but this is just the line work from that. So this is overlaid on top of the 100-year flood, and the orange here is the 2-year, and that's the 10-year, and the purple's the 25-year, but you can kind of see within the 100-year what's going on. This is an interesting case. We have a sewage lagoon here. It's within the 10-year or right around the 10-year flooding event. You know, the sewage treatment folks are limited because they want all their stuff to run downstream, you know, they don't want to have to pump the stuff that they're dealing with. So they're looking for the lowest elevation to go to. So sometimes that takes them right into the floodplain. But, you know, this is just good information to use for later development. Where can you locate, maybe here, that you'd never have to worry about floods. You know, it's just a great tool for that. We have the gradient of flood risk. This is basically all 8 returns stacked on top of each other. And you can really see the hot spots. You know, this is the 2, the red and the orange, the more frequent floods. So it just gives an idea, okay, hot spots, stay away from these areas, and probably be good for most things that you want to do. This is the National Heritage Foundation. I want to say national, but it's Natural Heritage Foundation. And Dwayne Sand, I think, is in the audience here. He was really instrumental in bringing this about. He was coming to our meetings that we had for the draft flood hazard products, and was thinking, boy, this is great information. What else can we do with this? And contacted the Iowa Flood Center about a project where they would determine effective shear. So basically shows where scour is along streams, where the highest incidents of scour are. It looks at the slope of the stream, the Manning's coefficient, the speed of the water, the depth of the water, the few more things. But it's a really good tool. This is also on the web for viewing. I think we have pretty much the whole state out there now. Yeah, so here's how you get to those maps: the depth grids, relative scour, and the flood risk gradient. All available through here, statewide. And we have a tutorial. If folks are interested in getting that from me, I can make that available if you want to look at that and see a little bit more about what's going on. How to get the data? Well, I'm going to give my DNR response here that it's in development. That's my smiley face. Right now, the data is getting loaded onto the Natural Resources GIS library. I don't know how many people are familiar with that. So if you want to play with the data, you can get the data there. If you're looking for the entire state, we often get somebody just wants the whole state. And we're perfectly willing to give that away as long as we've had our meetings. In the next 6 months, we're going to pretty much cover the whole state with meetings, so the whole state will be available. So if you have requests like that, get a hold of me. My contact information is at the end of this, and we'll set up a USB option to get data to you folks. I wanted to say a little something about this module that was created, or a series of modules that were created from the ISU Ag Extension group with the DNR's input. This is really good information for folks that aren't familiar with what all we're talking about with floodplains. What's the NFIP? What do I need to do for a loamer? That sort of thing. They developed it for the public officials. You know, the turnover in some of these public officials in some of these cities is often, frequent. Yes, thank you. But some people have been there for 20 years. And what if that person that's been in charge of the floodplain administration has been doing that for 20 years and leaves, and then there's somebody that doesn't know anything about where even the maps are? You know, this is just a really helpful suite of modules you can go through. They're like 5 minutes a piece. I think there's 20 modules, but it's really useful, and we've heard really good information about that. There's my contact information in the middle. That's me. Scott Ralston is our floodplain mapping coordinator. He's in the audience here as well. And we've been a team of, I don't know what you want to call us, but it's been a fun trip. I did not have gray hair when this started, but now I do. We also have Jason Kahn's name here, and he's in the audience. He's an NFIP coordinator or specialist. He has all sorts of information. If you are wondering what NFIP is or what your city needs to do for credits to help their constituents, that sort of thing, I'd encourage you to talk to Jason. That's really all I have. But any questions anybody has about this stuff, please don't hesitate.
Now we'll switch to some of the emergency management and some of the flood risk assessment using the derived products. So, got an advancer and a laser pointer in the middle.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Jessica Turba. I'm a hazard mitigation and disaster recovery planner for Iowa Homeland Security and Emergency Management. With me is Terry Brown. He's standing to the side, and he is a GIS analyst who's supporting some of the HAZUS work that we're doing within the watershed, which is intricate with what we just heard presentations on about the updated mapping that's going on across the state. So some people might notice that I said the word HAZUS, and that has absolutely no meaning to 90% of the people in Iowa, and I don't blame them. HAZUS is a software that FEMA supports, and it does a lot of the same things that HECRAS does. It supports the same type of risk analysis, and we had a really good experience with it just after the 2008 floods in Johnson County. You're kind of looking at a case study that was done where they were looking at the mapping products that were out there and if they could identify a risk and then make informed decisions based on what this software puts out. So HAZUS is supported by GIS. It's a mapping tool. Behind that mapping tool, it looks at earthquakes, it looks at flooding, it looks at hurricane. We're really interested in the flooding, the direct economic losses that are associated with that, because in emergency management, we always show up when things go wrong and people immediately want to fix it. And we want to integrate some of this work into our planning so that if you have pre-disaster recovery planning, you have an idea of where your issues are going to be. You have an idea of what types of losses you're going to be incurring, and you have an idea of what the path forward could be when you experience that kind of a loss. So the HAZUS results that we usually get from this type of software are loss estimates at the 10, 25, 50, 100, and 500 year annual return. We're looking at residential asset loss, commercial loss, other types of losses, industrial ag, essential facilities. For us, that's community identified. We also do have some places where we can pick up critical infrastructure. Business disruption, annualized loss, and then loss ratios. We tend to, in emergency management, look at systems when we're recovering. We're looking at transportation systems, utility systems, water systems, anything that has a significant disruption we want to know about and be able to talk about it at the jurisdictional level, but then also at the watershed level with those different stakeholders who are engaged in those conversations. So here's an example of a map that was pulled out from a flood risk report that FEMA produced in cooperation with DNR efforts as well. And you're looking at the middle cedar. It's got some interesting information on it. You'll see that the dark red is the high risk. You'll see some different pictures that talk about areas of opportunity that were identified. And it's a good, for some reason, mapping is probably the way that we communicate most effectively across different ranges of audiences. So I just said communication. What I mean is enhanced communication. In emergency management, we use a certain language. We talk about risk a certain way. In HAZUS, it allows us to pull outputs that facilitate communities in developing their risk reduction activities. When I say risk reduction activities, that's not something I would say to a community leader. I would say, tell us where you think your problems are. Let's look at these outputs and come up with ideas for solutions, and let's put them into your planning. Kind of like a comp plan, you have a hazard mitigation plan, you have a pre-disaster recovery plan. Let's put those things into place. If you have those items in place, you can also improve your community resilience. There's something very comforting about knowing that you have an idea of what's going to happen and how you're going to approach it if it does, versus having to be in that reactive stage where something horrible has happened and you don't have anything in place to deal with that type of an issue. Flood preparedness for our staff. We are looking forward to the opportunity to look at structure data commingled with updated H&H data so that we can be prepared and be able to deploy assets more effectively before there's an event, so that we don't have to stage things in random places and then pull them together the last minute. So the types of mitigation actions that we look at with this type of product are preventative measures, property protection measures, natural resource protection activities, structural mitigation projects, public education and awareness activities, and emergency service measures. Most of you are probably familiar with these types of things. I can say I'm always really surprised when I go someplace and we're doing disaster recovery work, and most people had absolutely no idea that they lived in a floodplain, or they had absolutely no idea that they couldn't leave town if their highways were inundated. Chris showed a really good map of choke points. If that town has a 100-year event, no one's going anywhere, and that's a really important thing to know. So here's a output. It's kind of an image from a flood risk report that was based on HAZUS. So we're looking at different areas of mitigation opportunity, dams, levees. We're not looking at coastal structures, but stream flow restrictions, past flood insurance, significant land use changes, and key emergency routes over top during frequent flood events. So when we get through this process with the HAZUS outputs and we have these local mitigation opportunity sessions, we engage in the watersheds, we're also going to be pulling this into Iowa's Enhanced Hazard Mitigation Plan. Is anybody familiar with Iowa's Hazard Mitigation Plan? There are 2 three. Great, 4. Thank you. Thank you. So this is a document that puts forward a strategy for how the state, Homeland Security, the DNR, how all of our counterparts are going to address risk, how we're going to plan for the future. And it's really important to know that there is a lot of money tied to this plan. In Iowa, since 2008, just in emergency management, we've spent over $1.7 billion replacing public infrastructure. We've spent over $400 million of that investing in hazard mitigation activities in local communities to buy down that risk. And so this is a comprehensive planning process. We identify our hazards and we create that risk assessment with better data that's now available. We're really excited about that. We have a mitigation strategy put in place, and we identify our capabilities. How this ends up working is that once we get through this process, we kind of deliver these data sets down to the local community level. The state has a hazard mitigation plan, all 99 counties have a hazard mitigation plan, and each jurisdiction in that county participates hopefully in that planning process so that it all kind of funnels down and then funnels back up. Part of this is also our repetitive loss strategy. So this slide is showing you a little bit about the process. It's a FEMA process, so if you've been engaged with FEMA, they first make you tell them what, and then they make you tell them the vulnerability to determine those losses that you're most concerned about, and then you do your impacts assessment where the HAZUS modeling comes into place. One of the new elements in our state plan, if you have an opportunity to see the 2018 version, is it will have to integrate projected climate conditions. So that's a very interesting world that we're moving into, to integrate projected climate conditions and identify weaknesses from that. So the plan development will prioritize actions based on that impacts assessment, and we'll integrate it as much as possible across our agencies and state government, and then plan for the future with our local communities. That is all that I have for this particular presentation. I will turn it back over for questions.
Yeah, so, I mean, we have plenty of time for questions here if we want to entertain some as a group here. I think I'll just have, if I can ask all the panelists just to be up here. If you just have a question, please try to direct to which presentation it corresponded to. If I need to open slides, I will. And then we'll go from there. We have the room for about another 20 minutes. So do we have questions in the audience as a whole? Yes, sir.
Yeah, Jessica, maybe this question's for you. Could you talk a little bit about what the state's looking at in terms of follow-up and training and outreach, just basically helping communities and COGS use this information, kind of what's coming next?
I think what's coming next is going to be locally driven. What we're doing within the watershed approach is I always think that the hardest thing to do is to develop the data. You listen to people talk about how they develop the data. I'm so happy I don't develop the data. But once it's developed, you have to have a way to kind of pivot to communicate that data at the local level or to the appropriate audience. And I think what we're doing, or what we're trying to do right now, is get the best available data, make sure that we understand what that means in the context of what we're looking at, and then talk to people, like Chris mentioned. Local decision makers have 20 hats that they wear, and hazard mitigation is not something that's usually on their radar. But if you can find a way to communicate information that makes it real for them, if you can make a problem statement that really hits home for them, I think we have an opportunity to really get some attention, especially with the repetitive flooding that we're seeing over and over again. And unfortunately, in the same spots in the state. I mean, we have counties that have 7 open disasters in the last 8 years, 7 presidential flooding events in the last 8 years. Think about those communities and what they're experiencing and how they're really reacting. So we're trying to find that context. In relation to the COGS, are people familiar with COGS by show of hands? Kind of, okay. So they're regional planning commissions. They basically take the baton from the state planning and they develop these local plans with local input. And they, sometimes those are people that are in an organized COG in the states. Sometimes those are engineering firms. Sometimes those are watershed management authorities. And we are trying a new model with the watershed management authorities, integrating that water quality planning with that water flood assessment planning. So you have too much water, you have too little water, you have things in the water. Let's all plan together and develop a strategy that deals with those issues. How local communities end up using this information is completely up to them, but we're trying to create this environment where they can see it and feel it and touch it in multiple ways, if that makes sense.
Other questions, audience, for the group? So exciting. The whole track today has been dedicated wrapping up to this culmination. So I'm not as excited as Chad. For people who saw Chad's, I can wave my arms a little bit if people need to get some questions flying. Okay. Well, we got one more over here.
The state hazard mitigation plan's expiring in 2018, right? So how will this feed into that process?
So with the updated H&H data, with the modeling that we can run through HAZs, with the parcel data that we've collected from the counties, which is building structure inventories, we will update our flood risk assessment, we'll push it through our hazard mitigation plan, we'll deliver it to local plans. And then the next time we have a disaster, the next time that we experience flooding, we're going to be receiving, or we always receive, federal funding, and the hazard mitigation plan is the reason that we do. If we didn't have it, we wouldn't receive those funds. We'll have that priority listing of projects and structures that we can put in place to buy down our risk, and then we'll fund those projects as they're available. The key to that funding is the state has to have a hazard mitigation plan that ours expires in 2018 and will be hopefully approved by FEMA before it expires. And local communities also have to have a FEMA hazard mitigation plan. Doesn't matter if it's a watershed plan, doesn't matter if it's a county plan, just has to be FEMA approved, and they can apply for project funding to buy down their risk. And what's exciting, for FEMA, it's exciting for FEMA, is that they're looking at ways to fund non-structural solutions, or what we would look at as detention basins, buffer strips, things that could work in the rural landscape that slow the water down, that reduce the peak flow. Does that kind of answer the question? Yeah.
Okay, go ahead, Scott.
You had mentioned this, but do you have hazards run at the census block level for the whole state, or are you going to be starting that work?
We have a level 1 hazardous run for the entire state, and I should have mentioned this, a level 1 hazardous run it's preloaded for your convenience with all of that wonderful 1970s data or 1980s data that currently exists. And it also has census data for census blocks, I think it is. Yeah. So it kind of averages out your building types and losses and things. You push the buttons, you push a lot of buttons, and it gives you an output. And that output is okay. I mean, for some areas, it's better than okay. But what we're talking about right now is preloading all of the updated H&H data that we know is more accurate than what we have now. And then we're taking all the parcel information and inputting all of those building structures that we gathered, which we know is more accurate than what we have now, and getting a more refined run. Terry is actually going to do a lot of that. So if anybody's curious about how that works, I'm just excited to get the product. But it should be something exciting to look at in combination with what the Corps and the DNR is doing in the Flood Center.
Go ahead, Scott.
Okay, go ahead and follow up on that, Scott.
You using the 2010 census block data? That's all that's available, right?
Yeah,
Yes.
within the program, with the newest version. Yes, you're fine. The newest version of the HAZs program does have the 2010 census block data incorporated within it. the key factor is, and the level 1 that we have statewide was actually run years ago, probably about 3 years ago now. So a couple versions prior. So no, it won't have the 2010 census data in what we have currently. But what we're producing now, yes, it's going to have the 2010 census data, as well as bringing in all of the assessors data that we possibly can obtain from each of the counties. That alone will be a significant increase to. Our goal is to go to the parcel level. It is. That's if we actually have all of the data available to us in a format and in a way that we can actually manipulate it and put it into HAZUS. If not, then yes, we're going to rely on the census data. It's going to be a mesh of everything. So if a county doesn't have the assessor's data, but yet we have the depth grids for all of the returns that we can put in there, we're going to use that. We're going to generate a more detailed study than what would initially be coming out of the box as what they consider as a level 1.
One last question. You have done a level 1 HAZUS, are there level 2, level 3?
There is and they're actually starting to go away from the level 1, level 2, and level 3 designations because there's realistically a huge gap in what that means. Level 1 analysis is it's a straight out of the box. You're using depth grids from NRCS, excuse me. Sorry, I've got a head injury. However, you manipulate no other data within that program. Anything that you do to an analysis above and beyond that is considered level 2. But there's a huge gap between level 2 and level 3 as well, because level 3 is a overall manipulation of the data. You're bringing in additional depth grids, you're bringing in additional H&H studies, you're bringing in HEC-RAS data, you're bringing in all of these other aspects to do what they consider a level 3. Will we get to that point? In some areas, sure, we probably will, because that data is going to be readily available. More of your larger metropolitan areas, obviously, your larger counties that actually have that data available to you. But again, we're going to use everything that we possibly can get our hands on to run the best analysis that we possibly can.
Yeah, go ahead, Andy.
Question about have you had any kind of like success stories for people that use that during Homeland and sort of say, hey, check this out. It looked like it gave some good information ahead of time.
So the question is, are there any success stories in using the scour data that was one of the byproducts of this? As of my dealing with the scour products has basically been to distribute it. We did make, the Flood Center made a countywide map. It's a PDF form, GeoPDF. You can turn layers on and off, and it has all the scour information on those maps. I don't know, Dwayne, you might have instance that it's been used. I know people have used it for analysis a lot to try and find areas, but I don't know about any projects that have actually been initiated because of the data, but I can see it coming. Yeah.
I chime in on that. We're NRCS. We're wanting to have that as part of what we're going to provide training to our field staff on, so that they account for that, have the opportunity to account for that during the conservation planning process with individual farmers. So
Does Greg Haddish work for you or with you?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I think I've given him
right.
most of that data already.
Yeah. So it's just kind of a matter of getting our folks in the habit of
Looking at it, yeah.
Consulting that information as they start with the process of working with people.
Okay. Anything else? Yeah. Go ahead.
This may be more for the Homeland or FEMA people, but two questions. Number one, does your mitigation work very often result in
So one project type that we have in our mitigation program is called property acquisition, and it's usually, if it's a homeowner that Terry wants to be bought out, or his property's been flooded and it's destroyed, we will buy that property. And I think the process is pretty prescriptive. I believe that no permanent structure can exist on that lot after that property is acquired. The federal government doesn't want to keep buying the same.
It has to be permanently deed restricted as open space compliant. There can be some usage to the land, but it has to be within FEMA regulation as well as NFIP regulation.
It's residential.
Well, it's residential and commercial.
We can do commercial as well, yep.
Yep.
And so the best examples that we've seen of that is usually through land use planning. And I think Cedar Rapids has done like a river corridor plan where they've created green spaces and parks, trailways, natural habitats. It's kind of like a floodplain restoration action. In the worst cases, it's after a disaster, and we have these flooded properties that need to be taken care of. But everything that happens at the local level is always voluntary. It's always the community's decision if they want to put forth an application, and the homeowner has to agree to it. Nothing is ever taken through eminent domain or anything like that.
Question two is how does your work interface with federal flood insurance?
Well, we work together but separately. I don't know. Chris, do you feel like?
Well, and I do know that the mitigation actions that they take, regardless of what it is, can go forth towards their CRS rating as well. So for community-wide, that can potentially assist with obviously lowering the rates community-wide through the CRS program.
If you have a hazard mitigation plan in your community, that's points towards CRS, which will buy down or could buy down that flood insurance cost.
And on top of it, actual infrastructure projects that have been funded with hazard mitigation grant funds have allowed communities to remove areas from the special flood hazard area through a LOMA, and that has occurred in the past. So it integrates itself with NFIP in aspects of that nature.
Does that mean you're going to reinsure places that have already been flooded without a whole lot of other attention?
Jason should answer that one. I'm gonna grab.
What?
Hey, Jason, do you feel like you want to join in anytime? Or?
In terms of flood insurance, very interesting area that is a separate program you have residential flood insurance that allows communities to go above and beyond the federal flooding standards, figure it out, higher standards, higher regulatory standards they can go through acquisition process, pretty open space in the community with and we get the more points, the community has, the community-based system will allow people to have electric only more or less certain city law. The more activity the community does, you can use more community, more points to earn, and the more percentage discount will all be.
Right, we'll do one more here from the audience, and then we'll leave a little bit of time if anybody wants to approach a panelist up close. So, yeah, go ahead, Andy.
Question for Traci. It looked like you had a pretty good system put together for Zone A, NFI zones put together. Have you seen any benefits in kind of that automated process and some of the other work?
So, have we seen any benefits in with the automated process on any of the other stuff that we're doing? So, interestingly enough, and I was just telling Chris Kahle about this, we have an Elkhorn Basin study for Nebraska Silverjackets that just opened up in our office, and that is actually going to have more streams, and it's going to be a very similar project. So it's going to have the automated system and the clicking and grinding through the Zone A mapping, very similar to what we did with Iowa. I am staying very far away from it. But overall, the difference between working on other projects as opposed to Iowa for floodplain mapping and hydraulic analysis is, I mean, it's a 180 polar opposite. Like I had said, I had done some mapping for one of the Air Force bases in Colorado, and having to start a model from scratch, I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't know that you had to cut your own cross sections or that you had to make your own bank stations and bank lines. That was stuff that I had never set up before until I had gotten off of Iowa. So you kind of get spoon-fed with Iowa, and like I had said, we created the process to a point where you could take a very non-technical intern level worker to be able to finish these products and to understand what they were producing. And so it's very unique and very cool.
All right, I think we'll conclude with that for questions from the audience in front of everyone. We do have the room for just a little bit longer if you want to come down, pick up contact information or share contact information of yours.